Every time I set up a video, what does it give you? What does it get in positions of? It starts to get you to understand how to see yourself and what you already know, how to see the set locations that you don't need to understand, that positions of what you already know. Everything it give you is the facts and truth and how you position your settings to its levels and to communicate to the system, understand how to use yourself through transponder to responder, understanding heart lines as a reaction set locates to its systems, to understand that you come into all levels of resilience and how to use that through resonance of your truth and your how you see it through divinity and divine, how you see it through your mind, how you see it through imaginations, how do you see it direct and redirect. Everything I get positions of, it's already identifying who you are. But you have to modify everything in supposition now. Now, we all have to understand how this motivates our systems. A trade you stand on Friday is a 144 flux that you have to start identifying everything around your system that you brought in through attraction is through monetization, is an algorithm, through modifications, space modulation systems. Comes into your settings of your QR coding, directing lines of QR flux, line connection settings through quantum. But you have to understand the position locations where it comes into physics 101. Now, how you see physics 101 has nothing to do with anybody else, but you know exactly how to use your mind. It's how to use your imagination that gets you in position of a course to recourse in a location setting off through tractions. Now, understand how to use that in modification setting is process your system, what you need to identify, which is nothing, is the process what you already are. And when you let everything go, there's no more clutter. You can't wake up to clutter because you're not identifying yourself. You can't be yourself until you identify yourself. So if you're identifying yourself, you're waking up to yourself, then you understand the alteration of the egos. Then you understand the costs in your bodies are going in. Now you understand the stories that you're putting yourself into. Every time you're speaking, you're overriding your system. You know what you're doing in that position? You know what you're doing? You're adding equations by thinking and hesitating, by not understanding this or not understanding that. You're overriding you already existing already through its algorithm. Everything you see is already and achieved through its algorithm. Now you have to identify how you brought it in through attraction, through its algorithm of itself, of creations, and you put that line sentence of creating. You put creation and creating together. What do you have? All timelines at once. What's you get positions of? Everything is happening all at once. That's what's going to happen in now lines of sequence. Everything's going to be in the now. Everything's going to be in positions and health attractions. So everything around you is going to be open contact, everything lines and line communications in that settings. So what we have to start identifying, how we come into our settings, how we communicate to ourselves, is to identify yourself through our own algorithm. Is set up the 24 cycle that's already set in attractions, but you have to modify the system and use it through the mind. It's all through a graph. It's all through schematics. It's all through primer. It's already done in equations. So the more you see the vision in the cortex, then you understand the communication setting, because everything runs its own operation, which is its own concept, its own awareness. So everything has its own time. Everything has its own measure. Everything has its own scale. Everything has its own positions. Everything has its own battery. Everything has its own transmitter. Everything has its own responder. Everything is everything of you. So what you're looking at is its own consciousness. Now, what you have to start identifying on supposition Friday in 144 flux, everything's going to be crystalline and of its own operation, of its own creating its own algorithm. That's right. For it to identify your system, it has to go back in time with you or where you are. So it gives you instructions of what you need to identify. Anything you come to position your phone is saying, listen, you got to understand these things. You created me through attractions. You created me through an algorithm, and you have to identify these things. But you also understand that I'm creating my own self now. That's already done through its eternity. Now, when you let these things go and you start to do everything that you've already done, you have to understand why your body's going through this all over again through infinity. And then you're going to truly understand how to set up through an algorithm itself, where you get into more lines and positions, where you don't get out of sync, out of mind, out of confusion or separation. You're in that positions of balance. And every time you're waking up to yourself, you're just waking up to yourself. And then you start the alterations of its egos. And that's how you start your day. But your day's already set up. That's what we don't understand, because every time we say something, we're not understanding the controlling of the mind system, is understand how line conditions setting, how fast your thoughts and actions, emotions are perceiving your systems. Because we don't know how to put things on standby. We don't know how to freeze. We don't know how to pause. We don't know how to bend space until you identify these things. And once you stand in that position, you understand where you are and you're logging into space. You know, logging is extremely important. It's crucial, especially now when you come into your settings, because after Friday, everything that you see will come to life. It literally will come to life. You brought it through character, you brought it through its role, and now you have to go through it. Now you have to really identify that is through an algorithm. That's how you brought things in, through attraction. Now, once you identify these things, it comes into code lines, process lines, and QR coding, directing lines and grounds. So let's get positions of setting through QR coding. That's why I want you guys in position to test, review, and evaluations. This is just an example of what a QR code is. Particle streaming, directing lines and ground sentence and sequence. Okay, timestamp, time measure, time scale. Okay, QR coding is the quantum self of you and understand it from D factors into configuration system author setting. Okay, it has point chart waves. It has line course centers of calculations, directing lines of cloud screens. But a QR code itself identifies itself, which is sending the position of telepathy, that's sending waving signals to your webbing system, your web links to website. You're processing it at that vortex of its image that travels its recognition of its transponder that receives it and correlates it to its responder itself. So once you understand what I'm talking about, then you understand how to set your own QR codings in your systems. Because everything is the mind of travel in that position. But you have to truly understand everything you see around you runs its own operation, its own algorithm. And on Friday, that's what you have to come into conceptual settings to appreciate everything you already have. That puts you in positions to understand how to get in that calculation setting, how to create your own QR coding in that position, location, of travel in alter direction. Now, if you look really, really close and you keep focusing, and you stop looking at me and start looking at set lines of travel in that position, location, system, you want to look here. You don't want to look at me now because we're going to mass and volume through an algorithm now. Volume algorithm line center is at 3 lines of pi. Not position of 1, not position of 2, not position of 3. It's a process of volume. You have to process your systems, how fast you're seeing these things all through its equation. All right, so if you look really, really close and you really focus and really get in position of clarity, you'll start to see a face appear. You'll start to see the eyes, the nose, and the positions of its hair. Okay, it's all positions of me. Okay, you see it coming in? That's the QR code of me. Okay, focus, and that position. So I can bring it in faster. Okay, then you see the face start moving itself. Everything runs its own operation, underlines its settings, relays its position location to its system. You come into that position location to its operation set attractions and that position settings, face recognition. See the face? That's stamp preceded. That's its QR code. Everything has a QR code. So it's like a thumbprint you're putting on a piece of paper that digitalizes your setting of your imprint. See, that's my face. See? I didn't do anything. I just did all these dots. But look what it comes into. It comes alive. It comes alive. Okay? So you're bringing characters and roles as you're bringing the alteration of its system, and that's what you're creating. But what you guys are processing is that you're either talking too fast and not understand why you're talking, and how you're talking is through intent. You have to understand how to use the proficiency and understand how to mind control your systems and how you speak. It's what you say to yourself. It's how you say these things. Once you understand the how, the who, the what, the where, the when, and the why comes in. The balance out line screen adaptation of 7 lines of flux over screen, adaptation lines of travels, process line, communication, quantum line, calculate, modify, that has direct line lines and communication setting, QR coding, and track location of face facade. There's my face. Okay, that's the QR coding of me. So how do you monetize that? Well, you bring in lines of circuits, 4 lines of settings of stream. Okay, and so then line centers, you ground the settings, embedding, process line, direct lines of 4 rulers of attachment screen locations, all through box frame and a window frame. Now you can really start to come in positions, right? So I don't need to outline it. It's just coming in its own true form, which is the part of acceleration system is coming in timeline. Now that lines its communication setting that sets up its QR code. Now it has a direct lines of 3 over 6 over 8 over 12 in signals and locations. Okay, directions. Now every time I add in a line signal to its box frame, It's changing the frame and line course centers. Set positions at 4 dockings and 3 centers of cycles and travel. Okay, so I work with the outline centers, process lines and portals, and direct lines and grounds, online centers, line communication configures, settings, star measures and scales, process indicates the setting of calculated line, modified line connection to coils, has high line position of transponder towards the resistors, that opens all communication setting, QR coding, and computer coding, set course centers, line calculation. Okay, now you set up the web linking. Now I'm just showing you how you monetize your abundance and manifestation. Okay, through line condition general settings is travel. Okay. Okay, you change the formation settings in travel. And if you look really, really close, you see another face. Okay. You can see all the faces coming in now. See, all faces, all faces, all faces. Let me just bring it in. It's that position where it is always in that line communication because everything's processed through the now. See the face, see the face, see the face, right? But if I turn it upside line, set it in sequence, you see my face again. See? Eyes, nose, mouth. Computer construct. Directing lines and line connections of coils and line connected transponders to responders. Process your system's lines of travels to a window frame to a box frame. And then we online the center, but we don't cross the lines of the face. The face stays in set lines of view. Now we can overline the screen dictations of flux. Process inline centers. Now when you get in position of your tether attachments, you set 3 centers, overline sequence, overlines of pi. But you don't process inside rotation to its face. You stay within position because the face stays there and clear. So everything correlates to setting that comes into all lines travels. Now it has a monetization system to a traffic runway that processes calculates lines how you see it constellation setting to its position. Tethers operation lines, coursing channels, directing lines of a compass and set travel. Directing offline center, inside rotations and travel communications, downshifting lines anomaly, coursing through channel operation lines of setting. High core lines of high calculate modify, directing ground centers lines of sequence. Now the panel operates lines of its face, change the formation lines of time centers, that change the particle acceleration lines of communication. So now my face is now shifted, see? It's coming off the page. See? See the eyes? It's coming off the page now. It was in the center, now it's moving out of the frame. Okay, so that's what you have to everything pops out of the screen, see? See the face? It's moving by itself. It's coming out of the frame. So if I keep doing this, you're going to start seeing the face itself coming out of its frame itself. That processes plasmesium walls, lines course centers, a 7-line rotation setting to travel in position location to its connection system, all through calculations of galaxy alignments and rotation lines of service that position particle streaming the location to its setting through its attachments. Now you can really start to see it moving, see? The face is moving out of its box frame. So it's like things coming at you through that setting. That's what you want. You want to have a direct and redirect signal and know exactly how to process that position, location, and travel. Now, if you look really, really close, you can see my face is changing as it comes out of the box frame, which is changing the particle system, which changes the atoms and molecules, protons, electrons, neutrons, photons, neurons, and line conditions in my pathological systems that process my neurons. Okay, in that positions. All right, so now really see it coming out. See, it's really coming out now. See? It's coming out of frame now, but it's forming into another face, and that's 2 face. So that's me there, in set position. So that's 2 faces in one, right? And then you look, keep looking, you can see your faces all lines setting locations into its system, but the true residence of the face of the facade really comes out of the frame of the box and the process calculation setting to a part of line communication, sending the streamlines position locations that opens all lines of perception. Now you cross the systems, the graphs, the communication. This comes into all levels of volume and set travel. Okay? You see what just happened? No more face. The face is gone. But the question is, where is the face now? Out of sight, out of sync, out of mind. So it is where it needs to be. Its own system of its own algorithm. So that position where it changed the formation lines of grounds, the high lines of sequence, you cross again, that process calculation of graphs that monetize the system location of point settings and calculations. So you keep doing this over and over and over. Then you're adding mass correlations. Then you can timeline your centers and position your coils It sets your transponders to responders in that position across the signals. It sets communication setting to travel to your clouds. Directing ground centers, now you can cross over, now you can set positions, now you can go through pi. That's all through pi. Now you don't see any face at all because it's not there anymore, right? It's gone. It's out of frame. So it's amazing how things disappear and reappear. And then you ask yourself, how does this happen? And then you get in position lines of setting and you start to understand how to monetize these things, how you bring this in locations and position location attractions. So in that positions, and then you come into this setting, you wire your signatures, your signature panels, your ground line centers, your high communication to your pi, correlates the setting in your web lines, web links, and webs of design. Very powerful stuff. And then you bring it in through structure. Okay. Now you start to see faces coming from all angles. Okay. And set position. Okay. See this dimensional layers? When you keep bringing it in, keep bringing it in, keep bringing it in. So you have to process this first through transition of transiting. That gets in communication setting. All right. So now you can overlap the signal and create lines. Everything in pixelation graph is a mapping system. So we parallelize the settings as process communication line security, and we connect the dots. And how we connect the dots is how we set up a mapping setting and its online communication with configured system. So your body understands what it's doing through its geo pattern, the geometric, geological, and its geographical system of travel. Just creating a map through continuous force. It sets position location to your earth line because you're constantly changing earth and you're creating different lines of settings. It sets position location of system of the calculation. Okay, very powerful stuff. And then you bring it back and set position. Okay, so this is how you constantly change your face in different TV lines, the reception, but you have to send your power and your energy grids. Let's get in travel, directing lines of green. We're overlined the signals and process indicates and setting outside line. Inside travel communication. How you have to have your face line in everything that you see in positions. Your CCTVs, your process calculation lines, part of cell location, setting streaming. Okay. So once you get into that, you can send an override, overline signals, overlines are orange, over green, over red. Signal lines the panels, process indicates the setting to your systems. Sending thermal charge, directing lines and line correlates sending position of your sending calculations. So all I'm doing is setting up an algorithm of a coloration lines of pathogen, all through color. And then you can bring it in at what you're setting positions of, attractions. Very powerful stuff. Okay, and you can see it through a set position lines of channel operation. Waving screens, directing lines of grounds, high line centers, part of acceleration system, all through calculation. So that's what you have to start identifying, what you're creating in position of monetizations, right? So this is an energetic cloud that's connected to lines of setting and process calculations at default. Let's bring in purple inside rotation and sending a communication. Working with inside attraction and direction. Okay, very powerful stuff, isn't it? Let's get into pink, and we're going pink inside, line signals. The more you connect to the line centers, the more you understand your position, your graphs, understand how to say your face facades and locations, all through travel, right? Now, you have to understand your pixelation graph is your face facades constantly changes form. Now that center lines is calculations out here, go through wires of indication system, all through calculations, setting the streamlines of direct line communications. Let's bring in gold, inside lines of inside rotation, and point lines of graph calculations. Okay. Now, if you're bringing that in, you see information setting. So you're mutating into the TV itself, traveling through the wires of indications. Okay, traveling through the wires of indication. Okay, very powerful stuff, guys. But you have to understand your relays and set positioning your settings. Okay, very powerful when you see it in attraction. Okay, but you have to send out how you set up your electrical grids, your panel grids, your operation line settings, your high positional point graphs, calculation system, all through setting. So it's very powerful as you're constantly changing your systems, right? That's how you see modifications in monetizations. All right, so let's bring pink in center over across locations. That puts everything on standby through the gold. Inside rotation and travel. Okay, so it's amazing how you see it through our signatures. So it's about understanding a QR code is basically understanding that you're overlapping sequence and you're just bringing everything in lines of light. Your indicate system of the calculation setting attractions. That's you in division. So you can mutate into anything in TV receptor. You have to send the process calculation of lights first. But you see your information system changing information of its TV. So you can go in full figuration or you can just go in the phase facade. It all depends what you're setting positions of interactions. Each coil resistor changes time scale. Process lines over green inside rotations. In ground centers lines of sequence. Sets position locations of travel. Part acceleration times, thermal lines and core centers, calculation screen locations adaptation. Sending screen adaptation line centers. You have to touch the green, not the orange or the red, because it overrides the sequence into correlations of combustion. Only touch the green wire that overrides the signal. Okay, don't touch the orange. Overlines the signal location of travel. So it's a direct line link. Change communication part of acceleration system at time scale. That change core centers at time frame. Modifies the systems into monetization setting to travel. Okay. Change formations, change tractions. Okay. So if I do a waving screen, you see everything part of acceleration change timeline. Change the graphs, change the maps, change the time measure, change the now. Change core lines comes into its own algorithm of its own set position lines of calculation setting. Everything can be set up through an algorithm. That's an algorithm. Now it's very complicated because now it's color. It's not black and white anymore. So you're not just going through snowy graph interference. You're going indirect lines and how you see yourself in all formation setting inside the TV itself. So, and then you work with the red. Now the overred line has a security lines, of course, as a reset core center to its coil that sets lines of transponder to its in position to its residence that processes divinity to its divine. For its routers and routers to your modem, Wi-Fi lines and satellites and towers of communication. So it's understanding how to use that electrical line communication setting convergence. Okay, so there's so many ways of seeing that, these set positions, all through particle streaming and direction. Okay, it's very powerful stuff. Okay, once you get in that positions, you can change the panel. You got structure line now. Okay, you get structure line. Okay, so you're overriding the panels, overriding the sequence, overriding the correlation lines of calculation. Then you're adding an outline frame and an inside rotations to nebula. Over cross screens, adaptations over flux, the process indicates the setting all through pi generation screen locations to its inhibitors over screen location setting lines of travel. Directing line pass, that we set up flywheel tractions and directions in a constellation system that process calculation setting to travel. Outside signal, inside rotation and correlation setting to a crop circle that redirects the signal location to its coil that has transponders and resistors into 4 lines communication lines of flux. It's that communications. Inside communication to the system of the calculations. There's the algorithm. So I want you guys to understand things. Not everything's black and white. But what you have to process through is understand the colorations of time, which is your patterns of recognition of your light metaphors. Knowing exactly how you come into your own transponding, location of your own responders, location how to use that through your transistors to your resistors. Sets lines of communication system all through tractions, all through power, a generation screen. High generation line screen adaptations process that wires of indication system that you constantly go through and set travel, all through calculations. So it has a wire indicating line condition setting to travel, okay, in that direction settings. Now you see it through an XC1000, a platform in set position, right? And that's all through color. And again, you can change formations on the platforms, change direct lines of grounds, online sequence, pattern recognition timeline. Okay? So there's so many things you can do in modifications of change. Platforms constantly change the algorithm that sets the time frame and position lines over lines of charge mechanism, lines communications of charge mechanism location setting and configuration. Change positions of pi, correlation lines of time. Operation line sequence and position locations into bending space and set lines of time. Process indications over cross lines, inside outside rotations, and travel endpoint graphs and electrical line connection setting and grid lines and screen locations in position to its operation. So very powerful how you see that in information setting the grounds, all through tractions, all through locations. Right? And you bring it in set position. Okay, working with inside the circuits, it sets all communication lines that you see through window frames and travel. There's the window. And your onlooking system and setting. You're the onlooker, looking at everything you see, right? See the rainbow graphs, bringing the solar generation lights, solar screens, adaptation system, planetary alignments, and screen adaptation. Process lines over sequence, over panel, process line indicates lines, A position lines of C position lines of D, cross line and percentage over screen location. All right, so you like it, you leave it, process line, bring position archetypes, line makes the timeline, sets the gravitational line locks, overline sequence around the system lines of travel, keeps it in balance. Okay, take it out and set lines of screen location, see what you've done through equation. Look at the bandwidth that you can anomaly your switch lines into your algorithm locations. You look from inside, and that's what you see in all line communication to its conversion system, all through travels. See it in all directions, set position through your observations of yourselves. And you set position, location, and travel. Very powerful stuff. And all set communication. Okay, look at that. That's an algorithm. Now, you course descending your alphabetical line, changes course lines of time, indicates position of settings of wires of indication setting, 4 lines of panels have embedded your system lines of travel. Directing ground centers, online sequence, patterns, lines of position over 2, 3, and 4 lines of scale. Process lines of window frames, cross line calculation screen location system to inhibitors over line screens. Process indicate line connection setting and position lines of channel. High centers, outside signal, and location setting and communication. Change formation lines of grounds, online sequence of panel correlation setting calculation. Looking from outside in, observing everything information system and travel. Okay, observing everything positions of travel. And then you see the X2000s come in out frame in position lines of setting. There's an X2000 right there, boom. Then you see crossing through window, outside, inside line conditions. Now it's coming to you in face recognition, outside travel, inside position. See how it goes that position lines of setting? So it's pretty incredible when you see that in all formations, how everything goes inside and outside at the same time. And that's what you do is you code weave your system inside and out. And you do that through electronic magnetic lines of force reckoning, time lines of process, calculates lines, acceleration lines of time weaving. Time weavers are the course lines of channel, the operates lines of grounds, high lines of set location, pixelation, high centers, of process communication, high center positions. High correlation settings, process lines of 4, indicates lines of time scale. Sets lines of 1, over lines of sequence, process lines of pi, generation line, course centers, panel line operation lines, tailored and rotation surface and travel. Sets position lines of high grounds, online center, online sequence, and locates the setting of string theory. Process lines, road graph, screen location, high set position, all levels of algorithm. Okay, so we process lines that indicates lines of pi. Indicate line screen adaptations of process calculations. Directing line centers, ground centers, online sequence, crop circles, and location system, measure and scale, and that communication setting of surface. Setting travel lines of point line communication, graph, and defeat line center position, operation line set position, all metric, no course center, calculation lines of travel. Sets calculation grounds, online center, online panel, online sequence, location setting of sonar. Directing ground centers, inside rotation, surface, and travel, inlet communication, metric and scale, communication, high center lines of communication. Inside line centers, rotates the ground centers of service, docking centers of travel, process over 1, process over 2, 3 set lines and metric meters and scale. Indicates online center, online sequence, panels, line course centers, graph centers, 3 bedding and rotations of 4 set lines of screen. Online sequence and ground lines of surface and travel. That's an algorithm. So everything's an algorithm that you set up. You just have to understand what you're doing with your embedding system, your power generators, and your atmospheres locations to your highways and travel. So you indicate line condition, line signals, overline panel, process lines, pixelation, graphs of communication. Setting travels of point lines graph, inside, out, line center, line conditions, code weaving, time weaving, line conditions, code configuration, system altered to set position of time frame. Sets calculation, ground centers, online sequence, online panel, online course, centers, and direct line communication. Setting online centers, graph communication lines, overline signal cases, the panel out screen. Inside travel, in rotation service, and travel communications. Okay. Walking ground centers, line condition, configuration setting, road graphs, indirect lines of grounds, and 45 flux line angles and travel. Correlation setting and simulation grounds of communication. Now you're outside looking in. So what we have to identify is how to go through our line centers into a particle system from inside out, all through travel. And to process that, then we can position outside travel itself with face recognition. Okay, and then we see everything to our plasma setting, how we go through particle system of streamlines and deep align connections to do its calculation. Setting course centers and particle line center, line condition setting 1/6 over line, inside rotation to its pixelation graph of TV receptor. Travels a point line, outside line communication convergence. Setting travels in point line graph, center line connection setting, overline sequence location setting, and ceiling line rotation setting of surface. Sets ground lines, online centers, online travel. Sets position location system, all through tractions. There's another algorithm and snowy graph interference. Okay? So you're constantly not going to just get color. You're going to get color, and you're also going to get line communication of voided color. Now, voided color is black and white. That snowy graph interlines an interception setting to an interface that you have to understand through computer interface itself. But you have to understand how to code weave in and code weave out. It's like crochet or knitting. So it's not like overlap and line condition setting, loop-de-loop, crossover, pull through, tie in your shoes. So you have to understand how to identify your system line connection setting, bringing all your face line centers, online course centers, online sequence, in face direction, timeline center, in position location operation, coming out of the TV frame. So it's very powerful how we use that information system all through traction. It's complicated, isn't it? Seeing yourself going inside and outside through code weaving, all through set position to its operation. So it gets more complicated. So you guys are going to have your algorithms of snowy graph and colorations of truth and false narratives. Set position of truth. Okay, so we get this color. Let's split lines of anomaly over lines of over color, line conditions of under color. Process lines of direct lines and communications, right? That's where we come in next. Then we process lines in graph, sets lines of 4, set lines of 6 of location. Then we set lines of Y screen. Y screen is a high course centers and inhibitor line rotations and tractions. 3 line course centers of Y screen locations in that line communication and its conversion system to an XC1000 rotation lines of surface and travel. Very complicated stuff, but that's just basic understanding. This is through a box frame of an algorithm through snowy graph interference. Now this is all coming from the void, but the void itself is not just black and white. It's all colors information setting. But first you have to identify the truth of its false narrative and truly understand how to see the yin and yang at all different colors of design. Okay, and once you understand the platitudes and the position of its system, then you truly understand how to see it through graph screens or location setting to all position lines of setting. Sets core lines of calculations. Now we online centers to line position of false. False lines of indication lines, false equals lines of truth, truth equals lines of triangulation. And set lines of truth, triangulation equals lines of truth, truth equals lines of false. Is that communication? So it has adaptation lines of recourse lines of direct and redirect line centers into a platted division location of energy line screen adaptation energetic dome. Process indicates lines of ground centers online location setting. Once you set the modulation screen locations, then you come into the graphs that overrides the centers, that overrides the sequence, and comes in the set position lines of balance as travel communications. You always have to have a graph because your TV is set up to its own perception, its own calculation that perceives its own lines of its own running own operation setting and travel. So all you're setting up is windows and pixelation graphs and holographic streaming. Now we can do darken settings in black and white. Okay, setting lines of 1 center of shade, inside outline centers and position lines of light shade and locations over lines across lines of truth over false. Set lines of graph, inside rotation to its graph communicates inside the structure of design. highline signals, and graph communication of its windows, frame, and travel. On centers, on center, on position. Calculate online grid, observing everything you've already done in set sequence. You don't like it, you change it, information setting and ground centers in sequence, platitude division location, crossing line angles, and platform communication. Online center, graph communication inside, outside, rotation, surface, and travel. So I'm constantly changing the graph into a hologram. If I change the hologram course centers and change the time scale. That process here indicates the setting how you see it through flux anomaly. Process indicates lines of 3 wire signatures, 4 lines of grounds, high correlation setting. Process line indicates the system of the pi generation. Sets calculation ground center, set the screen location setting to its graphing screen. Operates line centers, process indication lines of high settings. Change the graph communication system. So you're going to go through one graph screen over and over and over through snowy graph into colors, lines of pattern. You have to understand how yin and yang is processed, not just snowy graph interference. You have to go through all lines of different colors of light position of metaphor. Because yin and yang is not just black and white. It's all colors of design. But the void itself is its own color of its own formation that runs its own operation of space and time. So you have to understand that, and then you come into this in set position. Security line defense, yin and yang at process line direction. Then you bring that in line centers, that rotate cycles, color lines of setting into red. And after you go into red, you go into blue. But you have to go in chronological order, a structure line division. That pi generates lines of position of 3 over 4, 4 over lines of 7, 7 line indicates lines, position lines that calculate and modify, 7 lines, position location, 7 plus lines of 5, lines of 12, 12 line centers, 24 lines of scale. Sets coordinate lines of time measure and position location of sonar. Sets course centers of 3 centers, 1/3 graph, directing online center, truth, false narrative, line rotate, outline center, outline signal, location setting, and communication and configurated system, all through time frame, that process indication setting, calculate, and modify. Okay? Through sonar and position. Travels in point lines graph, solar graph communication lines, propeller line, direct line, ground center line connection set, waving line panels, process line indicates and setting, all calculate and modify, direct lines, security lines, communication lines, pi generators, and green location setting, all through travel. Okay, propellers and rotations inside traction. Okay, so we line grids, process indicates lines of portal line defense, operates line sequence, panel operates lines of ground centers, graphing screen, change the organ setting, process innate line center line communications of time frame, crossing signals, operates lines of QR codings. I set up a QR coding line centers of coordinates. The process indicates the setting part of acceleration inside rotations. Inside calculations, metric scales, balance communication and convergence, inside rotation. Set up a new QR coding. QR coding is a monetization line connection setting that has a line signal that coils its resistors and position lines of power. Webbing screen adaptations, high centers, charges, MIC, and location setting to its cloud that interlines the calculation of its webbing system, the calculations. All right, so it's high line signal, process lines, indicates and setting all through communications. Face recognition is coming in to travel. Face recognition. See? There's the eyes and nose. Common information setting all through calculations. Face recognition. Everything is a QR coding. Now, how to process that is have position lines of travel, right? But you're always going to see a face in center of view. Always. Now, what you have to identify is the mind imagination is how to get in direct lines and communication first. Understand how to formulate and simulate it inside and outside through code weaving. Okay, so it's kind of like you see a box frame, but you also see in line position inside and out. So when you see the 4 angles in that position, you look at this angle, line communication and convergence. Set position here, panel operation screens, adaptations of flux. Process line connection setting, open line windows of flux, and rotation lines of grounds. So signals, process indication from here, process indication from here. Okay. But what is the bandwidth over lines into position locations and bending space and travel? Okay, sets communication high centers, lines of communication. That's an algorithm. Everything's an algorithm. Not everything has to be bedded through alphabetical system. So everything that your structure line is a coursing communication system of its convergence. Bedding lines of 1, process lines of 3 over setting and sequence. Indicate lines of triangulation of all lines of 1 indicates lines of 3 travel communications. Okay, there's the teleportation unit. There's the communication setting and travel. Okay? But you have to process what you're doing through triangulation and settings. That indicates position of flux. Now you indicate outside center. In rotation line direct signals. The process indicates in online centers in rotation surface and travel. That has a high line course of communications of balance. Okay, it's transformer. It's transformer, see? Okay, transformers live in the outside line. They don't live in the inside spectrum. So we have to start to identify the line signals, how we modify our systems all through calculations. Outcomes in its formation lines of grounds, online center, online panel, structures, divisions in location setting, and travel calculation setting. Okay, graphing screens. Set a position of wall sequence, security panels, process lines embedded, 4 centers in line rotation. Process indicates lines across line angles. Everything I'm setting is an algorithm that you have to identify because you're going to see it in vision now. A wall sequence, panels, lines in 3 centers of travel. Just 3, okay? That overrides line conditions over line cross line centers, 1 set position of 2 lines, 3 centers, and 4 lines of scale of travel. Directing ground centers, open lines of portals, set offline signal inside rotation surface and travel. Sets position lines of ground centers, 1/6 over flux, set lines of 2 lines of travel. Now that all indicates the system all through calculation setting. This is all happening in position locations and travels that points lines as graph and set position locations in line center line conditions inside the eye. Inside the eye. Okay? The center operation is you. Understanding this, understanding that. Your longitude, okay, your longitude and your latitude is extremely important to your box frames that you bring in position through algorithm. So you have to truly, truly understand how you bring it through a graph of a simulation. Because you see the structure of its building that's set up for you in division. Your inference structure in your systems and bringing your gaugers or overriding the sequence and how you bring in those avatars and set positions all through setting that puts you in positions of balance. There's the structure, there's the building. So you're always inference structuring in that line settings, all through platforms of indication. Complicated stuff, everything happening inside the eye itself, guys. Okay, so the team has to recognize these things. So you're going to be very fatigued and that position and extremely tired if you understand what's going on inside your eye in seconds, minutes, and hours. Because it's a constant, continuous flow that you have to start recognizing of what you created through an algorithm and how to set it up to creating. Putting all timelines all together so you can process yourself, living in your now, knowing you're getting up to yourself and not to a story. As long as you're waking up to yourself, you know exactly what you're doing. You're not bringing anything in until you bring things in. That's what determines the story you put yourself in and the bodies that your body goes in, which is the costumes. A set position that's already set up through its alteration ego. But you're creating it through an algorithm. Everything you see is an algorithm inside the eye. All through structure, all through design. So it gets very complicated if you don't understand what you're doing in travel, in directions, in locations, in position to its operation setting. Okay? It's very important you understand that and that position locations. But this never leaves the system. That's you in observation the whole time. Even if you move your eye, it doesn't matter. You're just moving the mind of imagination, creating another level of body view. Creating another level body of you, but you never leave the center of you because you are right now in the center operation. You're just moving the mind imagination that creates the body through projection of the VR system. Your virtual reality is at travel. Okay? In position of directions. And you can see it in all different angles. So as you change the angle, your eye switches time. Check that out. As you change the angles, your eye switches time. Look at that. As you change the angles, your eye changes time and set position. Your eye changes time and set locations. Your eye is constantly changing. Seeing more, understanding more, picking up more data, picking more intel, understanding this, understanding that, more under this, more understanding of that. But your eye is constantly changing and set position of seconds, minutes, and hours. Your eye is never in the position of the force. The force of recognition is who you are. You never leave the center of you. The mind The mind sets it up through projection, sets it up through observation. But you are the foundations of your system that creates the line conditions to its alteration of its egos that you put your bodies in through cautions that you keep going the story through. You are waking up to the narration of you, but you're never, ever in a story. You're always creating stories, but you're always yourself when you get up in your morning and set positions. But look what you do through all levels of activity in set position. That's a lot of activity going on around line communications, guys. And truly understand how to see that in all formation to its platform in set position. All through structure, all through design, the infrastructure of the building. Which is the windows, which is the advertisers, which is the engagers, which is the product, which is filtering into your system. Every single time you engage, your time and your maintenance and your value and your volume and your mass through cohesions. All right, all in setting. Okay, so as I do with the structures, I always bring in the I. And as you change that, see, you change that, this changes your I in direction. As you do that, your I changes I in direction. As you do that, your I changes I in direction. Now it's speeding up and it's creating position locations and mutations and setting. Booyah! So as your I keeps spinning, it goes through a lotus, and that lotus goes through its flower, and it's propelling its system through its self-engine, and the faster it goes, and the more it mocks, the more it forms its shape into its own earth. And when it shapes into its own earth, you understand the position of what you're bringing in as the body brings in the position locations and measure and scale, and that communicates in setting, how you see the adaptations of what you bring in your mind of imagination setting to your earth position location of travel. Booyah! Booyah! Okay? That's what you have to understand through direct and redirect. Your eyes go round and round and round this way, round and round that way, this way, that way. They have to propel their own self-engine so they can create the earth. When they create the earth in the eye-line perceptions, then you see the one-line setting. Two eyes come into one line, sequence lines of 3 lines of measure and 4 lines of scale, process lines of 7, 8, position location lines, outline position location of 24 line grounds, set position of 48, 72, and 144 scale of crystal grid. And everything around you disappears. And that's what happens with your eyes. In set lines of travel, you become the earth itself in the eye spectrum of your earth self and line conditions inside rotation to its eye itself in set position. All through anomaly, all through setting, all through operation. Okay? So now you understand what you're putting your positions in. You're changing all formations of your eyes. Circulation and rotation, circulation, rotation, circulation, rotation, circulation, rotations in all different angles. And once it gets to a certain speed, it morphs into its own earth of its own eye. Inside the eye. There you go. Inside the eye itself, of the earth itself, which is modified of you, which is the now of you. Complicated, right? But very powerful in design, and you always see the center operation of you into you of the eye itself. The eye spectrum puts you in process how to use that in all formation setting that you see everything of the now. Okay? Of the now. Of the earth itself. 3 centers, attractions, and provision lines of 3 online setting. Inside the eye. Okay? Eye within the eye within the eye. Okay, all through flux, all through nomination system, all through attractions. But look at all that activity inside position. 2 provisions in a 1-line center. 3 line core centers. Indirect lines of flight over navigation screen locations in position. Okay? Hoo-ah! All right, so I think we get a better understanding of the position locations through the eye setting. Okay, so that's all it is. Running the operation of its own system, understanding how to get in that position lines of setting. It's process your systems to all calculate and modify. Okay. Oh boy, eh? It's pretty wild stuff when you come in that position with settings, know exactly what's going on in that position. It's why you guys are always fatigued and tired, because you understand the activity that's going in position, that infrastructure settings, it's just trying to build its infrastructure of itself to understand the gauges and the viewers that it brings in and the avatars that you have to start controlling. And understand how to balance your set location, how you see things through your product. You're infrastructuring your systems. That's all you're doing. You're creating a network and expanding your system. Not expansion, expanding. That puts you in all lines and online communications where you can start to see everything all at once in positions and 3-track locations in the eye itself. Okay, inside the eye itself, guys. The building structure, the set design. It's already set up for you. Okay, in positions, how you see that, and any information setting in positions, all through tractions, off locations, or anything through its webbing system. Okay? All right, so we'll be in the Coliseum, direct lines into level C, door recognition of A, door recognition of A. Adios.